Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez. Thank you so much for watching on this Thursday afternoon, the 22nd of June, 2023. And we've got a very special guest in the studio today. First, let me tell you who the non-special guests are. No, I'm joking. We love you guys. We just see you all the time. Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway. Brian is the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. Bobby's the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. You also see him on the Christianity Still Makes Sense YouTube channel. And joining us today is Greg Laurie, the pastor of Harvest Christian Fellowship in Riverside and Orange County. And, of course, from the SoCal Harvest coming up in about a week and a half or so here in Southern California. And you hear Greg on the A New Beginning radio program. So, Greg, great to have you here, man.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. Great to be with everybody. Bobby and Brian, it's great to see you all.
Yeah, it's great to see you.
Hey, likewise, Greg.
Everyone's wearing glasses, I noticed, so I'll put mine on too. So we'll all have glasses.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, these are props.
There you go.
You know,
Props, yes.
yeah. We want to look intelligent, so we put these on.
Yeah,
They're-
glasses help.
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
they really help if you can't see.
Yes, they do.
So it's great to have you on.
Thank you.
It's been a long time since
It has
we've
been a while.
been in the studio together, but
Yeah.
it's always good when we get to do this. And today we're not going to be taking any calls today because we just want to catch up with our friend Greg Laurie,
Thank you.
who has been here, there, and everywhere.
Sounds like a song.
Yeah, and that's not totally unusual for you because that's kind of your life. But this film thing that you've been involved in has really taken you a lot of places recently, right?
It has. It's, John Irwin, the director, told me this film will go everywhere. And he said ultimately it could reach upwards of 100 million people. And it's not that I didn't believe him, but that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around something like that. But we have just been blown away by this film because it had a great theatrical release here in America. And now it's opening in theaters around the world. Like it's opening right now in the UK. It's going to be in Ireland. It's going to be in India. It's going to be in Latin America. It's going to be, it's already been in Australia and New Zealand. So it's doing that. But plus it's on streaming platforms, Apple and Amazon Prime and others. But it's on airplanes.
Yes.
So people all the time are saying, oh, I saw it on a plane.
Yes.
And we're hearing stories of people coming to Christ, watching it. The cool thing about the film is that it's like it goes where I could never go. And it kind of reaches unexpected people in unexpected places, and I don't think they know what's coming because I think it's a beautifully directed film. People are kind of pulled into the story, including non-believers.
Yeah.
And next thing they know, they're being disarmed and it's touching them. And it's, of course, the origin story of this movie has happened right here where we're sitting. This is the story of Calvary Chapel. It's a story of Pastor Chuck and Lonnie Frisbee and Kay, your mother-in-law and your father-in-law. And it's a story of Greg and Kathy, a young Greg and Kathy meeting. And so it's got a lot of storylines interwoven. And it's a story of a generation that came to Christ during the Jesus movement.
Yeah. And of course, we're talking about the Jesus Revolution film.
Film, yes.
And
Here's the DVD.
yeah, it is amazing just how this is resonating with so many people. And, I think especially with non-Christians. And the funny thing is I heard somebody the other day telling the story of having seen it on a flight.
Wow.
And that was the thing that kind of just was like, well, you saw it on a flight.
Yeah.
But then I remembered, what was the movie with the Bethany Hamilton story?
Yeah,
where she
Soul
got-
Surfer.
Yeah, Soul Surfer. I remember seeing that on a flight years ago and thinking, oh, that was cool. But yeah, to hear that that the people had watched it on the plane.
Well, I think it
really
was when
fascinating.
we were shooting this movie, I said, to the director, John Irwin, I said, we really need a scene in this film when my character accepts Christ that is so clear that a person watching it could see how they too could accept Christ. I said the ultimate win would be if while I'm praying that prayer in the movie, that there could be people actually praying that prayer in theaters or wherever they're watching it. And so that was not in the original screenplay. That scene at the baptism where Greg, played by Joe Courtney, is baptized by Lonnie, played by Jonathan Rumi, that scene was not there. So John went back and rewrote that scene. And for many people, they see that as the most powerful scene in the film. It's a climatic moment. Everything's been building for the first hour to this moment. And then, of course, when Greg is baptized and he goes down really deep. And by the way, that was shot in a water tank in Alabama. And Joel Courtney had all these weights attached to him, and he was going, and he had to keep sinking. And then they had a tank, a scuba tank. They'd give him some air, and then you have to sink. They spent hours of him sinking for that one scene.
As a kind of a Houdini sort of move.
Yeah.
Weights tied on.
Yeah, but it's a powerful moment, metaphorically, visually, to kind of say in film, like how do you show conversion?
Yeah.
What does conversion look like in a movie?
Yeah.
And so I thought that John Irwin really captured something there to show in a way with music, with film, with this image of kind of what it feels like. And I think even a non-believer could watch it and say, wow, that's something spiritual and special, and I don't have that. And even that little prayer that Lonnie leads Greg in, I worked on that prayer with Jonathan Rumi, the actor, and he went over it again and again and again. And then when they did that scene, they had one take on that scene because the sun was setting, our permits were up, and our shoot was over at Pirates Cove. They got that in one take, and I just thought they caught something really special in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard from a number of people that was a real key moment. As a matter of fact, last week I had some friends here from Sydney. And so their 17-year-old daughter, so the parents hadn't seen the film yet.
Yeah.
Their 17-year-old daughter saw the film, loved it, and wanted to go to Pirates Cove. She wanted to see the place where it happened. So I took them down, and we were kind of standing up on the cliff and looking over everything. But Greg, I told you that was one of the stories that I wanted to mention. But I had a professor when I was in school, and he. It was really odd. Every year he would go to the Burning Man Festival, and he would go as an evangelist, he'd camp out and do all this stuff. But he never really gave us all the details of why that happened. So I just recently saw him, and he told us the reason why he would go to the Burning Man Festival was because his son would go, and he wanted to be with his son, and his son is a hippie. So his son's like a hippie in 2023. And so recently, his son came to know the Lord.
Wow.
And so him and his dad, they went off, and they were in some sort of obscure place, just spending some time together. And they came across a little theater with the Jesus Revolution playing at it. So they decided to go and see it together. And he said that his son wept through the entire movie and just said he's so connected with the film. He said this film was for my people. He's a hippie in 2023. But my friend Rick, the professor, Rick Richardson, he was just so moved and touched by the film, by the experience that it brought him and his son. So, I'm sure that's
beautiful.
Thousands of stories like that.
Well, and, older people loved it because it was a flashback for them.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing is younger people loved it. John Irwin was very intentional in saying this is for multiple generations.
Yeah.
He wanted it to be a movie that grandma, mom and dad, the kid, maybe even the grandkid could go to.
Yeah.
And we found that young people did connect to the younger Greg and Kathy characters and other characters in the film. And so that's a win for us. And I've heard so many stories of people coming to Christ. I have one guy, he works at our church. He's a pastor, Pastor Jeff, and his wife, Trish. So she has a sister, and her sister has been hard to the gospel for years and years. And these guys, Trish and Jeff, are the greatest examples of followers of Jesus. But the sister, I want nothing to do with it. Don't talk to me about Jesus. And then the sister somehow went and saw the movie, was converted, now is actively involved in our church. They're like, wow. It's a weird thing. It's like, I think the film sort of disarms people emotionally, and the gospel is in it. And really the ultimate way you can use this film is just show it to someone and then explain how they can have this relationship with God afterwards.
Yeah.
because
Now-
the film gets into it.
Why is there such a draw with non-believers, would you say? Because, I mean, the title of the movie
I know.
is Jesus Revolution.
I know.
So if you're sitting outside a movie theater and you look at the marquee and let's see what's playing, it's not like the title of the movie is something obscure
Yeah.
that people might see. Oh, look, there's a movie called The Trees. Let's go watch that.
Yeah.
And then, boom, Jesus.
Yeah.
And same with Amazon and everywhere else, Prime and everywhere else that it's showing. I mean, it's obvious. This is a movie about Jesus.
Yeah.
And they're watching it.
I think that people are endlessly fascinated with Jesus. Not so much the church, but Jesus. And, like I read that Gen Z kids have a very high interest in knowing more about Jesus Christ. And I think the overtness of it, Jesus, but I like the juxtapositioning of the words, Jesus Revolution. And we didn't coin that phrase, Time Magazine did. In fact, I just did an interview with them. And they're going to do a story on this magazine, and because the editor at large was on a plane, she sees the movie. She's the editor at large of Time Magazine. She sees the movie and realizes, Time Magazine played a key role in this film. Wow! And so she says, "I want to talk to you about that." But I said, Time coined that phrase. Back in the day, we called it the Jesus movement, and we called ourselves Jesus people, and some people called us Jesus freaks. But we didn't call it the Jesus Revolution. Time, I think, very astutely observed this is like revolutionary, and so it kind of stuck. So I think maybe it's the uniqueness of those words, unapologetically saying Jesus Revolution. But it doesn't preach at people, but the message is in there, and we show flawed characters. I think that's another thing is, everyone has some flaws in this movie, and I think people maybe are surprised that a, quote, Christian film, end quote, would be honest like that, because Christian films are generally not my favorite films to watch. I'm not a fan of a lot of Christian films, but so when John said he wanted to do this movie, and I didn't know it was going to be about my life, because there was a lot of people that had amazing stories back then. And when I had lunch with John, just meeting him, I told him the stories of all the people I knew in the Jesus movement. I told him about Raul Reese and Mike McIntosh and all these other guys who were changed by Christ. And I told him my story. And so I was surprised when he came back, about 7 weeks later with a screenplay kind of written around my life, Kathy's life, and of course, Pastor Chuck and Lonnie and all the rest of it. So, because people have asked me, why did you make a movie about yourself? Well, I didn't. I didn't make the movie. John Irwin and Kingdom Studios made it, but it was with my cooperation and blessing and participation. I was there on set for most of the shooting, which, by the way, was shot in Alabama, believe it or not. Most of that movie was shot in Alabama. And then we shot some of it in Newport Beach. Certain scenes had to be shot here, like Pirates Cove. But a lot of the interior shots, it's more affordable to shoot there. But it was really an interesting thing to watch. And I was there to help. I had to teach Kelsey grammar and Jonathan Rumi how to baptize someone. They'd never done that. Never done that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Or how a communion service works. There's a communion service in the movie.
And you taught Kelsey well, because he pretty much echoed Chuck's words when he spoke, with the bread and the cup.
Yes.
I remember thinking, man, he nailed Chuck right there. He got the terms.
Well, I told him how we say it. There's one scene in the movie where Chuck comes into his front room and the hippies are there. And in the original screenplay, Chuck says, "Oh my gosh." I said, Chuck would never say, "Oh my gosh."
No, absolutely not.
I said, but he did say, believe it or not, "Oh my stars." Remember?
Of course I
He'd
remember.
say, "Oh my stars."
My kids had to say, "Oh my stars," when they were growing up.
So we said, he needs to say, "Oh my stars." So that's what he says. So there were little things in there that, made it realistic. But then, of course, there were things that it's not exactly the way it happened. Chuck had other children. You married one of them. So, he had two sons.
Listen to this. This is what Jan said. Jan loved the movie. I think Jan's seen it like 4 times. But here's what she said to Cheryl. She said, they gave me your personality.
That's so funny. So, so John literally eliminated members of the family. And another funny thing, so like in the movie, I fall in love with Kathy before I'm a Christian. I didn't meet Kathy till after I was a Christian. But before I was a Christian, there was this kind of cute girl who was a Christian that I was kind of drawn to. And I went over and saw her in the Bible study on the front lawn of my campus. And, you know, I wonder, why is she into this?
Yeah.
We never became boyfriend or girlfriend or anything. But I kind of, she's there. I'm going to sit down and check this out. Mm-hmm. And so I told that to Johnny. He goes, you can't have two love interests. So he just made her Kathy. So there were some liberties taken in the movie. And then we go to a rock concert and we see Janis Joplin. Kathy and I never did that. Yeah. And I didn't hear Timothy Leary speak either. So, but the scene where I flip out on acid, that really happened.
Yeah.
And where Greg says to Kathy, if you ever get in the way of my relationship with God, it's over. That too really happened. So there were very authentic things, and then some movie magic, and, you know, and eliminating characters and compressing time. And it's a movie is sort of like more of a painting than a photograph. It's an interpretation. That's what he was doing.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because people have, you know, kind of been offended. Like, well, Cheryl, why weren't you in there? And Cheryl's like, well, I was 10 years old, so I don't know that there was really a spot in the film for a 10-year-old.
That's funny about the personality thing with Jan and Cheryl, though. I love that.
Yeah, that was a crack up. That cracked me up when I heard that. So, Bobby, you're just an innocent bystander here. Jump
Hi,
in,
Bobby.
and engage with this.
Greg.
Now, Bobby's in North Carolina. He's living and pastoring in North Carolina. So, what's been your experience?
Yeah, and there's just a hint of a delay, so I wait until you guys call me in so I don't interrupt you guys. But you know, when I watched the movie, Greg, you know, following your acid trip, I think you were on the side of a sidewalk, and Lonnie came up to you, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. That scene where he said, you know, I'll be there for you as long as you need. I can remember in the theater, I broke when I heard that. Personally, just as a, you know, recovering alcoholic and somebody who has struggled, and the beauty of just knowing that I'll walk with you through this. I won't shame you. And it was a meaningful message to me. But what I liked is it showed, number one, like you said, the reality that, you know, Christianity and, you know, being, you know, in this world isn't always easy, and we suffer and we hurt, and your life really depicted that. But I so loved that gracious moment that was put in there. There were moments where, you ever watch a movie where your wife or your kids are with you and you're like, man, I could really have a good weep session there. Right now, they would leave, but I don't want to lose my dignity all that much. So, but thank you for showing that stuff, Greg. That was a beautiful scene. Did it happen like that, or was Lonnie just there for you in your, you know, drug use, or how did that all come together?
Yeah, you know, the sad thing is, people will come and tell me their favorite scenes, and they're always scenes that were made up by John Irwin, with rare exceptions. So, you know, like when you said this to Kathy, I didn't actually say that to her. And unfortunately, Bobby, okay, here's what really happened. I took LSD. I had a bad trip, which means I kind of was out of my mind. I was running down the street screaming, just like it says in the film. I didn't know Lonnie yet. And so there was an older guy that, to use 60s vernacular, talked me down, helped me through it. And so I told that story to John Irwin, and he made that the Lonnie Frisbee character. But here's what's interesting. You know, I used to hang out with these druggy guys. They were the lowest of the low lifes. And we would walk around. We would walk from this guy's house where we would get high every day and walk to our campus, Harbor High, which was very close. And we walked by the house of Chuck and Kay Smith, but we didn't know Chuck and Kay. Jeff actually was in my high school. He was on I remember I was on a baseball team and he was playing. I was in distant outfield somewhere where I usually ended up.
And Jeff is Chuck, one of Chuck's sons.
Yeah, Jeff is one of Chuck's sons, of course. And so we walked by their house all the time. And Kay later told us about a group of kids she used to pray for, that God would save one of them or save all of them. And I realized later I was one of those kids. So I walked right by their house and they were praying for me. So a lot of what happened is within this tight little geographical area. And it was right by Chuck and Kay's house. But I met Lonnie a little bit after that, Bobby, when I heard him preach. That's when I kind of became friends with him and hung around with him for kind of a short little window of time. And then... So that's when, you know, when I first got to know him a little bit. But for me, the drug thing, it was not a thing that lingered. it was pretty much over with because I actually was already over it. Like, because I'd had a couple of bad trips on LSD. And then when I was smoking weed, I would have what they call flashbacks. Like, you're literally starting to hallucinate again. It was scaring me because all of my creativity was gone. I felt like my personality was gone. I felt like I was a shell of a person, not even the person I was before. And through process of elimination, I knew I didn't want to do drugs anymore. But I thought, but what do I do? Because, you have to understand culturally at that time, the drug thing for us was not like so much of an addiction thing, though there were people addicted to drugs. It was a searching thing. Like, if I take LSD, I'll find the answer. Mm-hmm. And of course, there were no answers to be found, just more questions, and more emptiness, and more problems. And so I was like over it and ready to stop. But I thought, well, okay, I know the answer I'm searching for is not in the alcoholic haze of my mother's life. I know it's not in the drug-infused phase of my life. Where is it? And it was when I saw the Christians, I thought, wait, what is this? And then I heard the gospel and I accepted Christ. And so giving up weed was pretty easy. I never wanted to get near LSD again. So that was kind of the end of my drug experiences. But I know for others, it's not like that, and they continue to struggle and it continues to be an issue, or with drinking. And, every one of us is different. But for me, it was kind of that chapter closed and a new chapter opened.
Yeah, I was kind of like that too. I kind of finished with the drug thing before I got saved because I just realized this is not helping me at all, and I was having similar kinds of experiences to what you had. So it was, though, it was on your high school campus that you actually first encountered Lonnie, right?
Yes.
He was the guy preaching, and that was where that was where your actual conversion took place.
Yeah,
right?
It is. And I just found out something recently because I'd never read Lonnie's biographies. He's written like 3 volumes.
Yeah.
So I was reading through one of them, and he said that on that particular day that they were meeting outside. Normally, the Christians met in a science room for their Bible study. On this day, the air conditioning was broken, so they went out in the front lawn. So I'm walking across my campus looking for this girl, and I see the Christians. I would not have gone into some science room with a bunch of Christians. Like, I wouldn't want to go into a room full of Jesus freaks, Because actually, we had a lot of Christians on that campus, and when I transferred over from another school, they said, Greg, be careful. There's a lot of Jesus freaks on this campus. And I said, the last thing you'll ever see is Greg Laurie becoming a Jesus freak. Are you kidding me? So I wouldn't have gone in that room. Yeah. But because they were on the front lawn, I felt, okay, well, I'll sit, a distance away where I can kind of eavesdrop, but I don't want to be a part of it. But that's when I heard the gospel. And so they're singing these songs about Jesus, and I'm kind of intrigued. Like, why would they do that? That makes no sense to me. And I wanted to just dismiss them all as idiots or, lunatics. But the problem was I knew a couple of them from earlier years, and I knew they were not insane people. So I had to kind of entertain the thought that maybe something's happened to them. And then I just entertained this thought, what if that's all true? Then I dismissed it. Of course it's not true. Because of my upbringing, 7 husbands of my mother and living all over the place, I was very cynical. And then the thought came back, what if it's true? It can't be true. And then Lonnie, who was on campus that day, stands up and, of course, he looked like Jesus. He had shoulder-length hair, beard, and he even wore a shirt that kind of looked like a robe, And he stands up and he starts preaching, and I'm like kind of stunned by this whole thing. And I don't remember most of what he said, but he said, Jesus said, you're for me, you're against me. And I looked around at the Christians and I thought, well, I'm not one of them. Does that mean I'm against Jesus? I mean, I always kind of believed in Jesus, but I didn't know I could have a relationship with him. I just saw him as a historical figure, but I couldn't discount the fact that these people seemed to know Jesus. And he gave an invitation for people to come forward, and I thought there was no way I would ever do that. And next thing I know, I was up there praying. So I told the story. I've told this publicly many times, and I told it to John Irwin. John says, I need your permission to move your conversion to right before you're baptized because the sun's setting and it's going to be a great scene. I said, well, John, as long as I'm converted, I'm okay with it. So he moved it to right before I was baptized. But in real life, I did it at my high school campus.
If you've just joined us, you're listening to a special edition of Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here with Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and our special guest, Greg Laurie, who's talking about the Jesus Revolution movie. Maybe you've seen it already, maybe you haven't, and now you're listening to this conversation and you really want to see it, so go check it out. It's all on all the streaming platforms. You can purchase a DVD at harvest.org. And, Greg, everyone's talking about their favorite scene in the movie. One of my least favorite scenes in the movie, and let me tell you why it's one of my least favorites, is the scene where Timothy Leary is up there and he's giving his little speech, whatever he says. And the words he says, it's not that I didn't like the scene, it just made me sad because I'm thinking, what he's saying, what he's offering to all these young people is something the church should be offering to the young people. Yeah. But instead, the church is often seen as just this place that, no, you're not welcome here. Yeah. No, get out of here. You're not perfect enough or whatever. Timothy Leary was saying, oh, yeah, come as you are. Yeah. This is you're accepted here no matter what. And I thought, man, we've messed up in so many ways.
And those were his real words. John Irwin actually went and found a talk that Leary did, and those were his actual words. But that was you remember it was juxtaposed with the scene where Chuck and Lonnie are in Chuck's house, and Lonnie is telling Chuck there's a generation searching. Then it cuts over to Timothy Leary speaking, and Greg and Kathy there. And then Timothy Leary says, "Be reborn," and LSD packets fall out of an airplane. And then it comes back to Chuck and Lonnie, and Lonnie saying to Chuck, the doors of the church are closed. And so it's a kind of a revelation moment for Chuck to do something. And that's where we all, the kids then realize this answer is not in this other stuff, the drugs and the Timothy Leary and the rock bands and all that, but it's in Christ. This was the counterfeit. And the real thing was a relationship with Christ. Brotherhood was in the family of God. And love that we wanted was, in a relationship with the Lord. And so he was trying to show the contrast there. Yeah.
So people have asked me, obviously because of my relationship with Chuck, well, how much was real and what was this like and that? And the one thing I said, I mean, obviously there's a bunch of details that are not exactly the way they happen. I said, but I think what the movie really did well, I think it captured the era. I think you really got a feel for what the world was like at the time, what young people's lives were like at the time. And, that crazy scene in the van, I lived that same scene a few times. So I'm like, that was, and, the party where, Kathy's sister, the OD and stuff like that. It's like, okay, that's all very, very real. I've seen all of that stuff in my own life experience. So that's what I've said. I said, it really captured the era really well and captured the era in the sense of what God was doing. And Greg, you and I have talked about this before. I think, and I was talking about this to somebody today, I think in some ways it's kind of unexplainable humanly. Yeah. God just did something that was, in some ways it was so radical. It was, I almost think of all the, revivals in history, this could be in some ways the most crazy one. That God was working in the midst of such madness. Yeah. And, graciously and patiently working with people who, like from the stories from God's Forever Family and all of this stuff in San Francisco, where, they would lead somebody to Jesus and take LSD to celebrate because their friend got saved, and you're just like, okay, that's complete madness. Yeah. But in the midst of it, it wasn't like God was using the LSD, but in the midst of it, God was patiently still working in people's lives to bring them, finally they figured out that this probably isn't the best idea, So, yes. But think of all the historic moves of the Spirit, and you look at this one and think, wow, this is really wild. Yeah. And I think in some cases for ultra-traditional Christians, that freaked people out. Yeah. It's like, wait, God can't, no, that can't happen.
Yes. That's right.
So we can talk about more when we come back.
Yes, Pastor's Perspective. We'll come back in just a little bit with our guest, Greg Laurie. We're talking about the Jesus Revolution movie and also the upcoming Southern California Harvest Crusade, July 1st and 2nd. You can find out more at harvest.org. You can purchase the DVD there or the Blu-ray or watch it on your favorite streaming platform. And we'll be back in a little bit with our guest, Pastor Greg Laurie, here on Pastor's Perspective. We're back on Pastor's Perspective. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for listening on the radio. Thanks for watching online on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Brian Perez here with Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway and our very special guest, Pastor Greg Laurie from the SoCal Harvest, happening in just a few days at the Honda Center in Anaheim, a new venue. We'll tell you all about it a little bit later. You can get all the details now if you want at socal.harvest.org. We are here at our flagship radio station in Southern California, K-Wave, which is on the campus of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, which is great because this is where the Jesus Revolution started. Well, yes, this is what the movie is about and how everything happened, not specifically on this corner, but at the church. So it's always
there
really
was
cool
a tent not far from here, and that was part of it. Then up the street, that's where it began in that tiny little chapel up there, which I think now is, what is it?
It's an Alzheimer's, actually.
Which is kind of interesting.
Yes, we'll move on from that comment. But Greg, I want to ask you this. So I think also another reason that there's a strong resonation, people resonating with the film, is I do think there are cultural similarities to what we are living in right now.
Yeah.
I still think on some level that time was crazier on one level. I mean, you know, people were getting shot by police on college campuses and stuff like that. And now today, of course, we have the radical LGBT and all of that. So it's different. But obviously, I think what is happening with people's attraction to the film is partially due to the fact that they're feeling like this is speaking not just about what happened then. This is resonating with things that are going on today.
I think so. What was it? Malcolm Muggeridge that said, all news is, what is it? History is new news. Old news happening to new people. I've got that all mangled. But you know, there's nothing new under the sun. So we do see repeats of things. And I do think what we're seeing today is a fully realized version of what was beginning in the 60s. You know, of course, my generation, the baby boomers, you know, we'd come through World War II, and there was this kind of optimism, even reflected in the car designs and in everything. It was futuristic, you know, everybody's going to get their little house and have their family, and, you know, shows like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, and, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, my generation rebelled against that. And so we thought, why do we have to be married? Why can't we have free love? Why can't we do drugs? Why can't we break down every barrier? So, you know, the drug culture of the 60s is a drug epidemic of this era where, you know, 300 people die every day from fentanyl, and the sexual revolution fully realized, and the LGBT, why can I not pronounce it? Say it for me, Brian.
LGBT.
There we go.
QI.
And then plus for good
else.
measure, and the trans movement, what it is, it's just, I think it's a search for God. I think people are searching. They're trying, oh, maybe I'm not a man. Maybe I'm really a woman. Maybe I'm not a woman. I'm actually a man. I think it's really horrific that these things, surgeries would be taking place in the lives of young children.
No.
You know, it's a scary time, and I think people just keep pushing these boundaries further and further. But I think in many ways, we've sown the wind and we're reaping the whirlwind. And here's what we want to say to all these people. God loves you. We love you. There is a God in heaven who has a plan for your life, and really what you're looking for deep down inside is a relationship with him. You're not going to find it in drugs. You're not going to find it in sexual experimentation. You're not going to find it in redefining or attempting to redefine your gender. You're not going to find it in material things. You're not going to find it in anything. You're searching for God. You know, years ago, Solomon went on a search into everything you could search into, and his conclusion was it's all emptiness. And his conclusion was, here's the sum of the matter: fear God and keep his commandments, right? So I think that people have to come to this individually. And people ask me, who are the hippies of today? Well, it wasn't all hippies. You know, I didn't even become a hippie till I started coming to Calvary Chapel. I was kind of a surfer guy, and I grew my hair and beard out because that's what all the cool Christians did. So it wasn't just hippies, it was young people. Some had short hair, some had long hair. And so the youth were reached. And so who are the youth of today? Well, they're Gen Z. Now we have the Alpha generation following Gen Z. It's, you know, millennials as well. But these younger people are searching in all these ways. And it seems to be amplified by social media, not in the best way, of course. But it's almost like gasoline on a fire. And we have the increase of suicide among young people, especially young girls, and the anxiety and the fear and all the things going on. And my heart goes out to this generation. And we need to give them the same message that was given to us. You're loved by God. He has a plan for your life. These things are empty. Come to Jesus. And that's our message. It's Jesus. You know, he's always the answer. He's always, like Paul said, I don't want to know anything else among you except Christ and him crucified. So I think we need to remember in the church, our message is not, we get into secondary issues that take the place of the primary issue. Mm-hmm. And we need to remember the main thing is to keep the main thing, the main thing. And the main thing is Jesus and the gospel.
Yeah, and if you know, especially when it comes to the identity thing, which is so massive in the culture today. Yeah. I mean, the gospel is the perfect. Yeah. It's the perfect answer to the identity thing. Here's your true identity: God created you. Yes. And God loves you, and you're disconnected from Him, but He wants to reconnect you with Himself through Jesus. That's the gospel, and you actually have a reason for existing. Yeah. Because God made you with a plan. I think that, you know, that simple thing that we've said for decades, you know, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. That is true.
It is true.
It is absolutely true. Yep. So shifting gears, the movie, talking about the movie, but Greg, you are going to have a Southern California crusade once again. Outreach. Do you guys still call it crusade? Is it?
Yeah, we call it Harvest Crusade. You know, it's funny, when we first started it, Pastor Chuck said, let's call it Summer Harvest. So we called it Summer Harvest for years. And then we started doing it different times of the year. So we thought, well, maybe we should lose the summer. So then it became Harvest Crusade. Then for years we called it SoCal Harvest. And this year I said, hey, let's just call it Harvest Crusade. Because we discovered when people Google looking for it, the number one search term is Harvest Crusade. So I thought, let's just own that. People know it. We call it that. We've always called it that. And so we just literally are calling it that this year, Harvest Crusade. I think this year is a little bit of a throwback to the earliest ones, because when we did them in the early days, in the 90s, it was kind of praise and worship music and then a message. And then in the recent years, we've had a lot of the great artists out, for King and Country and Newsboys and, POD, you name it, we've had them, right? But we thought, let's go back to kind of a worship focus again. So, as you know, we've moved from Angel Stadium to the Honda Center. It's a more intimate arena. And the reason we left Angel Stadium is we were planning on going there, but they told us you can't have people down on the field. And we have people walk forward to accept Christ. And we tried to get them to change their mind of that. They weren't willing. So we pivoted and we're going to the Honda Center. But the cool thing is this is going to be unlike any Harvest Crusade you've ever been to. We're able to kind of control the environment a little bit more with the lights and the media, but it's going to have a very intimate, immersive feel, where you're going to be led by some of the finest worship leaders in the country. Chris Tomlin, Phil Wickham, Michael W. Smith, the Passion Band, Taya, who sings on the song Oceans, So that it's going to be a beautiful thing. And we're kind of almost, the way it's going to flow, there's not going to be a lot of breaks in it. It's going to be have a beautiful flow to it. It's going to be a different kind of a Harvest Crusade. And you're thinking, well, wait, is this for Christians or non-Christians? Well, it's for both. But I think there's something powerful when a non-believer walks into a room of thousands of people worshiping God. The secular culture has nothing like genuine worship. People don't even sing together anymore, really. But here we are honoring the Lord, and the Lord says he inhabits the praises of his people. And in a super simple way, when I was just a kid on my high school campus, watching Christians sing songs about Jesus moved me and opened my heart to the gospel. So this is more of what we did in the early Harvest Crusades. And so we're kind of doing a little bit of a throwback to that. And it's going to be beautiful. And I think you should get there early because it's going to be unlike any harvest event you've probably been to.
And you guys are doing two nights.
2 nights.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, space is going to be limited, though, right? In comparison to the stadium.
It's true. Yeah, this is the unfortunate thing. So maybe we'll return to Angel Stadium. There was an article in the Washington Times about it, and they interviewed folks from there. And they said, we want Harvest to come back. Well, we're willing to come back, but we want to have people come down on the field, because that's a big part of what we do in the crusade, is they make their public profession for Christ. They don't have to go in a field to accept Christ. We know that. Yeah. It's just moving your heart toward God and believing. Yep. We don't think there's something magical in walking forward or magical in repeating a prayer, but we think this is a beautiful thing, and there's something that really marks it when you make that public stand. And so we're going to do it that way at the Honda Center, and maybe we'll be back at Angel Stadium next year. Who can say?
Yeah. So Bobby, I don't know. Do you know, Greg? Did you know that Bobby actually came to faith through?
I sure did.
Your Monday. It was Monday night.
And we're very proud of him. You're doing such a great job, Bobby. Yes, I knew that.
Aw.
Bobby, tell that story again real quick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Playing college baseball at Saddleback, and my teammate, Cade Gaspar, he ended up getting drafted out of Pepperdine as the number 1 pick for the Detroit Tigers back in '93. And he loved listening to you. And him and his sister said, you got to hear Greg Laurie. And so I was totally unchurched, just partying. And I never heard the gospel until I was introduced to you and Cade. And so he would bring me on Monday nights, and all you guys would do is worship. And I didn't know church language. I mean, if you'd have said, turn to Romans, I would have thought, well, I didn't bring Romans, I brought my Bible. That's how in church I was. If you talked about the forefathers, it took me months to figure out that it wasn't F-O-U-R, it's F-O-R-E. So I was clueless, Greg, totally uneducated, couldn't pass a test to get in the military, failed the ASVAB 3 times to go to the Marine Corps. But what you laid out, it just transformed my life. And I literally was so thankful, and I resonated, and I didn't know what was going on around me. Everybody seemed to have questions. Some had 1, some had 2 for you raising their hands, but it was beautiful, and it all began to make sense. And I'm so thankful. So yeah, hearing your voice and sitting across the screen and being a fly on the wall in this moment is, well, it's pretty special. I'd say, you're kind of like my Billy Graham, in that way. You looked up to Billy Graham as a youngster, and your life was radically impressed by him. And so I just feel so thankful to Pastor Brian for this role, and just to be around all of you guys. It's really quite special, to be honest, and just thankful for you, Greg.
Well, thank you so much, Bobby. It's a beautiful story. And for years we did these Monday nights here at Calvary, and that is what turned into the Harvest Crusade. And so that was a very special time. It went on for like 13 years, and then one thing led to another. And so we're thankful for Chuck's vision and these great opportunities that opened up for us. And, one day you wake up and, whoa, I'm 70? How did this happen? I was like, when you heard me, I was probably in my 30s. And so...
Yeah, you were late 30s, 40.
Yeah.
But you were still talking about your hair, and it would crack me up. Like you had like a mullet or something going back then, I think.
I had the worst thing you can have. It was a skullet. And a mullet is when you do a comb over, which you should never do. I had a comb over, and it was long in the back, so it was a skullet. And when I look back at those old hairstyles, I'm like, oh my gosh, no. But that's what I was
Greg,
doing.
you've aged well, and your style has really improved over the years.
Okay.
I mean, but you were always with the times. But we look back and think, how did we ever think that we should dress like that?
I know.
I mean,
Very, very true.
I see pictures in the 80s of me. I don't know if you remember when I used to have glasses that were like this big.
You did. I remember that.
And I'm like, why did I think I should wear those? What was going through my mind?
But everyone was wearing them, so it was okay.
I know. It just seemed like the thing to do. But
the 80s were just fashion-wise were bizarre.
I do not think they're going to ever make a comeback.
Let's hope not.
Hey, I had one question, Brian, if I could ask Greg. And it's this. You mentioned, Brian, a moment ago, the similarities when you juxtapose today with the 60s, and you think of the sexual revolution, the drugs, the searching. And I can see a lot of that. The part that I'm wondering about is this whole idea of sin. It seems like Satan's done a masterful job in getting our culture to call evil good and good evil.
Yes.
And I wonder if that felt that way. I wasn't alive in the 60s. Did it feel that way? Like where, they were the sexual revolution, it was so celebrated like in the LGBT, or is there a different kind of celebration where today it feels like you can't call anything, like for example, you could go to a bookstore and a transvestite could show up and do story hour and give a lap dance to a kid. But if a mother showed up and read a children's book and gave a lap dance to a kid, we would recognize the outrage. So it's almost as if there's a heterosexual flaunting that's non-acceptable. But in the LGBTQ, it's like, if it's flaunted, let's celebrate it. I wonder, what is this going to mean for presenting the gospel and talking about sin when our culture sees it not as sin, but something to celebrate?
Yeah. And it was different back then because, there was kind of a conservative culture of sorts. There was what we might even call cultural Christianity to some degree, sort of certain ideas that it's good, like a family is good and honesty is good and patriotism is good. That's all gone. I think cultural Christianity is dead. Today it's like Mars Hill. It's like it's pagan secular culture. and people believe anything and everything, but it's actually hostile toward our values as believers, or it wasn't that way in the day. It was more like, here's kind of a quasi-conservative culture, and I use the word quasi. It wasn't Christian culture, but it was quasi-conservative, and this counterculture, so they were very different, coexisting in the same world, one pushing against the other. Now it's like, almost like the counterculture is the pervading culture. That is the overriding culture. It's in media. It's in politics. It's in everything. It's in academia. Everything is liberal now. And so to be a committed follower of Jesus, you just became officially the new real rebel. I mean, if you hold a biblical worldview and you want to follow Christ, you're actually a rebel. And in the real sense of that phrase, there's nothing rebellious about doing these other things. That's become mainstream. But back in the 60s, that was not mainstream. Mainstream was quasi-conservative, little bit of Christian subculture. But now everything's reversed because all those kids grew up to be adults and teach in our universities and run our media companies, and it's being passed on to the next generation who are taking it even further. So it's crazy, for sure. Yeah. But the answer, so I think you were asking, like, how do you bring the gospel to this generation? Was that? I forgot your actual question.
Yeah, I'm wondering what your approach is as an evangelist.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking through the gospel at times, and I'm going, do we have to spend time establishing, like, that there is such a thing as objective right and wrong?
Right.
And what is morality? Yeah. Or do you just feel like, man, I just trust in the old-fashioned gospel and I just lay it out there? Because it almost just seems like you wake up and you walk outside and everybody starts repenting of sins around you. And that would be a nice gift to have for the rest of us. But how's that working for you?
No, I think there's a place for both, because apologetics has its place in preparing the ground, but I still find that it's the essential message of the gospel that saves people. I once asked Billy Graham, if an older Billy could speak to a younger Billy, what would you say to yourself? What would you say you should preach more on that you've learned after all these years of experience? He said, without missing a beat, I would preach on the cross of Christ and on the blood, because that's where the power is. So I think there's a place to build the bridge, some apologetic work, depending on the person you're talking with. Everyone's different. There's not a one-size-fits-all for evangelism. Sometimes it's maybe a moral person like a Nicodemus, an immoral person like the woman at the well, more of a pagan mindset like Paul with the folks on Mars Hill, whatever it is. So you, as Paul said, adapt, become all things to all men, but as a Christian, your ultimate goal is to get them to the essential gospel message. And power emanates from it. Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It is the power of God unto salvation. And the word, the Greek word dunamis, there's explosive power in this message. And so I find what I have done over the years, I've become simpler and simpler. And so I write my message and I start stripping it down to the most simple way to put it, not assuming that my listener understands anything that I'm saying, as you just pointed out, Bobby. And I try to make it a little more conversational. And you pray for the Holy Spirit to work, because ultimately conversion, it's a work of the Spirit. No man comes to me unless the Father draws him, the Lord says. And so when it's all said and done, it's really not my clever message or illustrations, or it's ultimately the work of the Spirit. But there's a place for all these things that God can use as tools.
You're listening to a special edition of Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here with Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and our special guest, Greg Laurie, from the upcoming SoCal Harvest, or I should say the Harvest Crusade. Sorry, I said it wrong.
It's all good. It's all good.
It's all the same thing,
all
right?
roads lead to harvest.
That's right.
We call it many things.
Honda Center, July 1st and 2nd. Bring your friends with you. This isn't just a Christian concert, so to speak, with Chris Tomlin and Phil Wickham and Passion and Taya and I'm leaving one out, Michael W. Smith.
Michael W. Smith.
Bring your friends with you, the ones who don't yet know the Lord, because these 2 nights could be the nights that they make a decision that could, change their eternity.
That's right.
SoCal.harvest.org is where you can find out more details.
Yeah. We just encourage people 3 things: pray, invite, bring. Pray. Pray about people that don't know the Lord, neighbors, family members, friends, whoever. Pray First pray for them, then invite them, extend the invitation. Would you come with me to the Honda Center? And then bring them. Don't send them, bring them. Mm-hmm. We found that 85% of the people that walk forward on the field to make a profession of faith were brought by a friend. And if you can't come, watch the webcast. It'll be live at harvest.org. We'll put it on all of our social media platforms, YouTube and Facebook and everything else that we can. So it's out there. You can participate live. It's July 1 and 2 at the Honda Center, right around the corner.
Greg, going back to what you were saying a minute ago, I think somebody asked me to do this little 5-minute thing on Billy Graham, of all people. I don't know why they asked me to do it, but I love Billy. I read his autobiography and other things, of course, on him. And they were asking me from a preaching standpoint, like, what are the things that kind of stood out? Mm-hmm. And I said, the one thing that always stood out to me with Billy was his simplicity.
Yeah.
That he just, sometimes you're like, wow, that was like the simplest. Yeah. And I remember that time when he was preaching that, like the largest crowd ever, it was all simulcast. Yeah. It was like 1 billion people or something. Yeah. It was crazy, some crazy amount. And I remember thinking to myself in anticipation, like, what's his message going to be to 1 billion people? Yeah. And when I heard it, I was like, holy smokes, I could have given that message. I mean, it was so simple. Yeah. And the funny thing about this one is he got like off on this rabbit trail where he was talking about being in this car and he fell asleep or something. Yeah. And I'm like, this guy's talking to 1 billion people and he's saying this. And then, of course, he gives an invitation and 1 million people responded. But I think, there's something to what you're saying. I think sometimes we can make it too complicated. Mm-hmm. We start thinking about all the crazy things that people think or feel or whatever. And a friend was sharing with our church last night, and she's like an evangelist who lives in England, and she was saying, nowadays she's just straightforward and like, come with me to this event. Yeah, it's about Jesus. We're going to tell you about Jesus. You need Jesus. Your life is so screwed up.
There it is.
Just come on because God loves you. And, and I think sometimes, we're beating around the bush. We're kind of afraid to really say what it is and just spit it out.
Yeah.
The simple and the big fear with everybody is, well, I don't know what to say. Mm-hmm. Well, just say what Jesus did for you, right? It's just like, hey, this is what happened to me.
Your story is a great way to build a bridge. Yeah. I think starting with your testimony is a great way to begin.
Yeah, and people often, that's an easiest way to begin so often. People ask you what you do, what you're about, or any of that sort of thing. So
I once was lost, but now I'm found.
There it is.
Yep. All right, Greg Laurie, thanks for coming on Pastor's Perspective. It is good to have you here. The door is always open. Come anytime. Bring Kathy with you next time.
Yes.
We haven't had her on the program
That'd
in a while
great.
to answer Bible questions and things like that. But it's Thursday, so we're going to be here for another hour. We're going to take a short break, and then you can call in with your questions, 888-564-6173. Find out more about Harvest at harvest.org. You can purchase the Jesus Revolution movie there. You can watch it on your favorite streaming platform, and come on out to the Honda Center in Anaheim, July 1st and 2nd. Here's the thing about July 1st. It's on the next page of the calendar. So somebody might have circled July 1st and 2nd on the next page of their calendar. They're not going to know until the night of June 30th when they flip the page, oh my goodness, it's tomorrow. So you better set an alarm on your phone, July 1st and 2nd. Come on out. We would love to see you there. For Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway and Greg Laurie, I'm Brian Perez, and Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.